with the author Kevin from the article Using Quotes to Present Claims Practices for Writing Stages of Qualitative Research, published in October 2024 issue of the Organizational Research Method Journal. Kevin, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Chi.
So for
So
our intro today,
go ahead.
yes, we will talk about the background story of the paper, such as the author's motivations and the review process, as well as their further thoughts on taking this research forward. And now to start us off, Kevin, can you give us a brief highlight of your article and how this article can help scholars in their research?
Of course. So in doing qualitative research ourselves, and in reading lots of qualitative research as editors and reviewers, one of the things that we were struck with was how often the quotes that authors choose to use in their papers don't really align with the claims that they're trying to make. And so we put together this method to really help authors think about pre-writing. So what is happening between when you've finished your analysis and when you're actually starting to compose? And really what this paper does is it gives authors sort of a guidebook for some of the steps they might go through to really think through the claims that they are making, which quotes they're using in those claims, how to think about their quotes, how to think about where they're putting their quotes in their table or in their text versus in their tables, and really how to construct their qualitative finding sections so that they're as powerful as possible.
Thank you for sharing us the brief highlight of the paper. And you also mentioned that from your experience as a researcher and also as a reviewer and editor, you have seen the use of quotes that might be not as effective. So can you elaborate more on the motivation of like why you decide to start this paper in the first place?
Yeah, so what happens when we do qualitative research is that quotes might get coded in a certain way, or they might get coded with multiple codes, depending on what that participant is saying, in the context of that interview. So over time, as a author, you might see a quote a certain way, and you might every time you see that quote, you might think of certain images or think of certain things going on in that context. But your knowledge is much different than the reader's knowledge or that the editor's knowledge. And over time, you kind of forget about what that quote actually is saying, what those words actually mean to a novice reader, or somebody who hasn't been exposed to that quote for the first time. And as a reader or as an editor, and you're going through the paper, you don't have any of that context. You weren't there with the person. You don't know sort of the background of what else that person might be saying. And oftentimes what happens is the author throws the quote into a section believing that quote might actually say something that is not really reflective of the claim that they're making. So there's this mismatch between the strength of the quote or the content of the quote and the claim that they are trying to make. And that may not be a fault of the analysis. The analysis and the coding might have been very strong, but the quote over time gets put into a section or gets lumped with other quotes where it may not be the best fit. And so this really, what we're trying to do here is give authors a way to pause and to reflect really about the writing and sort of you've done your analysis, you have your quotes set, but let's take another section where we're deliberately thinking through what each claim is, what we're trying to say, and then let's look at those quotes very specifically for the characteristics that they have. How vivid are they? What is the content saying in those quotes? We can bring in outside experts or novice readers to help us with those sections and really think through sort of how we're going to present those quotes again to make sure we're as tight as we possibly can between the data and the finding or that claim.
Yes, and I think your thoughts on how codes can be very context-based and the readers and the reviewers may be distant from the context. Thus, when the researchers using the codes, they think that, oh, this is very illustrative, but maybe it's not as illustrative as the writer expected. So what are some interesting background stories in the review process that you have experienced for this paper?
Yeah, so lots. So the history of this is Heather Vough, my co-author, was handling qualitative manuscripts at AMJ. At the same time, I was the editor-in-chief at AMD and handling a lot of qualitative papers. And AMD receives around 40 to 50% of qualitative manuscripts. So I was reading lots of qualitative pieces. AMJ obviously receives lots and lots of qualitative papers. She was, handling those on the micro side. So when the genesis for this idea came up, we were both of us reading many papers a week that were qualitative and thinking through what can we do as editors and as qualitative researchers ourselves to make the process more accessible. And when we looked around at some of the guidance on how to write up qualitative finding sections, there wasn't as much as we thought there was. So, you asked about stories. I think the prototypical story is, you're reading a paper and, the author says, something very specific, like, this excerpt shows how leaders used their emotional stability to influence their followers. And, their followers were engaging in this different decision-making process because they captured the emotions from their leaders, or they detected this emotional stability, or some very nuanced argument. And this is just a hypothetical example. And then they would present a quote, right? And that quote might be like a paragraph. And the paragraph would be something like, from the follower, oh yeah, I see my boss every day and I really enjoy talking to my boss, and we have these great meetings, and I'm really energized when I come out of meetings with my boss. And so you have this disconnect between this sort of nuanced argument around emotional stability and follower perception of that, or whatever the constructs that author is going after, and this quote that's pretty vague in nature that could really be about anything, right? It could be about, sure, it could be about emotion, maybe, but it might be about sort of team formation or team dynamics, or maybe it's about conflict, or maybe it's about the relationship between the leader, or even something else. And so that author has a definitive vision for what they're seeing, but that isn't being translated to the reader or to the editor, because that quote doesn't really have the, as we say in the paper, the comprehensibility over that claim. It's not really capturing the nuance that the author is giving us. So slowing down in the writing process is what we're hoping for, and again, a more deliberate look in to each claim by itself. What are the quotes you were using, and are you confident that those quotes are actually representing that claim?
Yes, and what are some of, like, when you're writing this paper and also when you submitting it, what is your experience and Heather's experience in the review process of this article? What are some feedback that the reviewers have shared that you find very helpful that help develop the paper to its like published version?
Yeah, the the review process was great at ORM. The reviewers and the editor were very positive about the paper from the very beginning, which was wonderful. The big question we had is, how is this different from analysis? So the way we were able to modify the paper and really improve the paper throughout the review process was adding what we have now as figure one, which is really distinguishing the qualitative methods and the qualitative analysis part from the qualitative writing. And really focusing the paper even more definitive on writing, and not so much about analysis. And because our goal was not to change grounded theory or ethnography, or any, narrative analysis, or whatever qualitative method that authors might be using. Those are great, and all of them could be using quotes or interviews, to some degree. Our intent was always to focus on the writing part, not the analysis part. Does that mean that an author might realize something about their data in the writing? Of course they might, and we acknowledge that point. But that's obviously not the focus here. The focus is really about how do we outline, how do we structure, how do we storyboard? Because really that's what we're doing, especially with qualitative findings, is that you're telling stories. And we haven't done as much training on storytelling as we've done on the qualitative analysis, and we're trying to rectify that.
Yes, and you mentioned in the beginning that there is not a solid set of guidelines for writing up qualitative research. So beside your article, when you're doing your literature review, what are some of the guidelines out there? Is there a lack of guidelines, or is there a lack of consistent guidelines or similar guidelines? Can you share more about that?
Yeah, so great point. So we have some of these suggestions, I would say, in the field. Mike Pratt talks about power quotes and proof quotes, and where to put quotes in the text versus table, which is really helpful. We have Karen Goldenbiddle and Karen Locke, talk in their book, and they provide some examples, of how to use quotes in different types of sections, and how to narrate around the quotes. But it's a few pages, here and there. We see in some of the grounded theory work a little bit of discussion, around composing. But overall, when you look at the vast majority of qualitative methods, resources, and articles, it's pretty much about the analysis and deriving your higher order themes, or your higher order categories, and how you basically get to that point where you have a theoretical model, or you have higher order themes that you want to present, either those constructs, or you want to present the relationships between those constructs, and that's sort of where it stops. But when we go back, and we even think about trustworthiness, Lincoln and Guba, this idea of really helping your reader believe that you have found what you have found. There's another step, right? And that step is to go from that model, or those higher order themes, to a composition. And what do we put in that composition? How do we structure that composition? How do we edit our quotes? How do we structure our quotes? How do we put quotes together? And we have some great exemplars, but we didn't really have a paper that helped put all these pieces together. And so a lot of what we do here is take some of the great pieces, or exemplar works that have been done in qualitative methods, and present them together, so that authors can see, oh yeah, this is what these are some of the steps that I should go through once I finish my analysis, to actually putting it down in writing.
Yes, and what do you think are some future research directions in, the research around presenting, providing guidelines for presenting effective evidence for qualitative research?
Yeah, so in terms of future research, I think there can be more done, especially in terms of what types of messages are most effective. Essentially, what should we be doing as qualitative researchers, and even looking at which messages resonate more. How should articles be structured? I think right now it's a little bit of the wild west in terms of what different journals are doing, in terms of asking for different criteria to sort of defend their qualitative writing. And so you're seeing qualitative method sections and qualitative writing actually look very different in different journals. And so, I think we're all trying to figure out as a field where we should be going in terms of our storytelling and writing. And I don't think it's great for the field that you have, sort of one set of criteria when you go to ASQ, and another set of criteria when you go to AMJ, and another set of criteria when you go to JAP. That's probably not where we want to be. So, getting more data on what resonates, what is most impactful, and to show again the power of this, the comprehensiveness and the vividness that we talk about, would be really helpful, not only for the authors but for the journals. And then also getting people to talk about this, right? About how it's helpful for them to create these claim tables and to think through their claims, and how they're how different types of quotes are working together to support a claim, as well as to be teaching strategies like storyboarding, in the context of broader storytelling, to junior faculty or to doctoral students.
Yes, and from my very limited experience with qualitative research, I also know that there are different kind of methodology and paradigm. Do you see the guidelines can be applied in, like, for example, to grounded theory similarly to phenomenology, or there will be variance among these different methodology and paradigm?
So I think the broader point about storytelling and writing applies to everybody, right? In fact, we have a course on writing in our PhD program that every doctoral student takes, and we're starting to see a few schools have courses dedicated on writing. Sometimes it's writing in specific domains, but in general, what should we be teaching in terms of writing? What writing skills should doctoral students have when they come out of their PhD programs? How is AI changing how we write, and the quality of our writing? I think all of these things are timely, that apply to any methodology. There's obviously not every methodology would have quotes from interviews, and that's fine. So maybe some of those finer points or those examples would only apply to certain methodologies. But the broader point around structuring claims, structuring evidence, and storyboarding applies to everybody.
Yes, I think during my limited training with qualitative research, I really appreciate the aspect of individualism, the aspect of the stories, and it's very rich content in there that I think all researchers can learn from knowing how to present, how to tell the effective story through your article as well. So what are some advice you do have for younger scholars who are interested in conducting qualitative research, conducting interviews, and presenting their claims uh, outside of the scope of your article, or some advice for scholars who actually want to write papers on synthesizing these guidelines and these suggestions?
So my biggest piece of advice is, just because you've gone out and you've done interviews doesn't mean you have an interesting theoretical contribution. Most of the time when we collect qualitative data and we ask folks questions, it could be an interesting context. It could be something that no one has studied before, but probably what you're going to find is what somebody else has found. And that's just the way of the world, right? We know a lot about how people behave and how people react and how people make decisions. And usually when we start in a qualitative project, at least this has been true every qualitative project I've done, and I've done many, is especially what you initially find is probably what somebody else has found. The mistake and the advice comes when thinking that, okay, I've done 40 interviews, that's enough. I'm gonna put that in the best package I can and send it off to a journal. That tends to be a really bad mistake, because it's going to delay the process of actually finding the ultimate contribution. And you find the ultimate contribution by taking those 40 interviews or 30 interviews or whatever you have, and finding the one or two things that maybe were mentioned here or there that are truly novel, that maybe you weren't expecting. And then you develop a new protocol and you go after that. And then you start to triangulate a little bit more around that new finding. And then you develop a new protocol, and then you go after that even more deeply, right? So the metaphor I like using is like you're trying to discover a hidden treasure in a cave, right? Or you're trying to discover a valuable resource or a mineral. And you're going down the cave and you're looking down different passages, and some of them might be dead ends. And don't stop, come back out and try another path. And I think way too many people, especially younger researchers, stop. They stop at a dead end and they think, okay, this is good enough. I need to get this paper under review, so let me do my best to try to sell this research because I have a good number of interviews, but the reviewer doesn't care, right? They don't care whether you have 30 interviews or 50 interviews. They're looking for the strength of the claims and the novelty of the claims. And if you stop data collection too early, you're going to be very frustrated in that review process. And ultimately, it's going to take the project even longer to publish because you'll be going from journal to journal, taking maybe years in the process before realizing you actually need more data.
Yes, and I think qualitative study is also a very iterative process as well that will require I think the review of the data. So not wait until collecting, maybe not wait until collecting after 30 interviews to like review all of them, but perhaps some like 5 or 6 interviews and like review to see if there's any interesting finding, to if there's any adjustment in the protocol and the interview questions. Yes, and I think it's also like for me as a younger scholar, there takes a lot of time. Qualitative research is really intensive, and it will take a lot of time. So we also will need to like be aware of that, of how what will make a very good contribution and how to save our time in the process by the continued iterations. Um, so do you have any other thoughts that you want to share with the audience that we have not covered today?
I mean, the only other thing that I'll say, with this paper is, if you don't look at anything else in the paper, I would look at table 1, which is the claim table, and figure 2, which is the categorization of quotes. I think these two things work very well together. This idea that with that claim table, you're really putting in table form just the quotes. That's all you have there. You don't have your interpretation. You don't have your, to use the golden biddle and lock. You don't have your telling. You just have the showing, and just having the quotes and the categorization of the quotes next to that claim is really illuminating for an author, because giving that to somebody and saying, "Do these quotes support this claim?" is very difficult, right? That's really challenging, and really shows the weaknesses and the strengths potentially in the quotes that you've chosen to present. And just that tool, and that was the start of this paper, was developing that claim table and categorizing the quotes. Everything else was sort of built around that structure. That would be my advice of those two tools, that can be very helpful, because there's no way to talk your way around a bad quote with the claim table, because it's just the quote.
Yes, and I can see that the categorization of the codes also is very succinct, the way that you're presenting it at the table right now. So that will be a very helpful resource for audience. Kevin, thank you very much for your time today and sharing with us about your paper. And I also want to show appreciation to you and Heather for your work in providing this guideline for qualitative research to effectively presenting their claims through very rich codes that they have gathered in their data collection process. And I believe that the guidelines on storytelling can also be applied to other researchers as well, not just qualitative researchers who doing interviews. Thank you very much for your time
Thank you,
today.
Chi. Thank you, Chi. I really appreciate the opportunity.